It looked like a gramophone turned into a gun, a round, spinning disc perched on top of a steel body. Soviet soldiers called it the record player. The Germans called it the pan gun. But for the men who carried it, the DP-28 wasn't a catchy nickname. It was a curse. A gun that overheated, jammed, and snapped under pressure. A weapon that promised firepower, and too often delivered death to its own crew. This is the story of the DP-28, the Soviet machine gun that tried to keep up with an army marching through hell, but broke every step of the way. Before the Second World War, the Red Army had a problem. It had millions of men, but not nearly enough automatic firepower. Most Soviet soldiers carried the Mosin-Nagant, a bolt-action rifle from another century. Meanwhile, the German army was arming its infantry with automatic weapons, fast, efficient, modern. The Soviets knew that in modern warfare, whoever could put more bullets downrange usually won. They needed a light machine gun, something cheap, mobile, and simple. Something that could follow a peasant army across a continent. Enter Vasily Degtyaryov, one of Stalin's favorite weapons designers. His idea was simple: take the firepower of a heavy machine gun and make it portable. The result was the Degtyaryov Pichotny, or DP-28. The DP-28 was introduced in 1928, a light machine gun firing the powerful 7.62 by 54 mm round, the same cartridge used in the Mosin-Nagant rifle. It was meant to give Soviet infantry squads a backbone, one gunner laying down automatic fire, while riflemen advanced. But Degtyaryov's design was unlike anything the world had seen before. Instead of a box or drum, it used a 47-round pan magazine that sat on top of the receiver, like a vinyl record. When it spun, it looked almost like a turntable, hence the nickname, the record player. It was simple, yes. Rugged in theory. And on paper, it fit everything the Red Army wanted. A light machine gun that could be made cheaply, handled by peasants, and carried through mud, snow, or blood. But propaganda lies. What looked like a symbol of Soviet strength was in reality a fragile machine barely held together by good luck and desperation. From the start, engineers and troops noticed problems. The barrel overheated quickly, and unlike Western designs, it couldn't be swapped out in the field. Once it got too hot, accuracy vanished, the weapon warped, rounds cooked off, and the gunner had to stop firing or risk it exploding in his hands. And yet, it remained the Red Army's main light machine gun through some of the most brutal years in human history. When Germany invaded in 1941, there were tens of thousands of DP-28s in Soviet arsenals. Every squad had one. Every platoon depended on it. But in the icy hell of the Eastern Front, it showed its true colors. The DP-28 was heavy, around 10 kilograms loaded. It jammed when frozen, seized when dirty, and its fragile bipod snapped with the first hard landing. Worse, the pan magazine, the heart of the weapon, was its greatest flaw. Each one had to be loaded by hand, round by round, under perfect alignment. If a single cartridge sat slightly off, the gun wouldn't feed. In combat, that meant disaster. Imagine lying in the snow, machine gun at your side, hearing tanks approach, and your weapon refusing to fire because of one crooked bullet. It became a running joke among Soviet infantry. The DP shoots when it wants to. But behind the humor was fear. In the chaos of battle, reloading that circular magazine was slow and clumsy. Each pan held just 47 rounds, half of what the German MG-34 belt-fed systems carried. And the gun's rate of fire was painfully slow, about 550 rounds per minute. Against a squad of Germans armed with MG-34S or MP-40S, that difference could mean life or death. Veterans described the sound of the DP-28 as a lazy cough, sputtering instead of roaring. One Soviet sergeant wrote in his diary, "When you pull the trigger, you pray. Sometimes it sings. Sometimes it only sighs." Still, it was what they had. The Red Army couldn't afford precision engineering. It needed something that worked enough. Something that could be stamped out by the thousands, even in factories half destroyed by bombing. That was the DP's true purpose, not to be perfect but to be possible. In 1942, while German factories produced fine-tuned weapons, Soviet plants operated in basements, barns, and rail yards. There was no time for luxury. The DP-28 was cheap, simple, and made from parts that could be repaired with a hammer and wire. It embodied the Soviet approach to war, quantity over quality. And sometimes that worked. In Stalingrad, Kursk, and the frozen forests around Moscow, the DP simplicity kept it alive when other guns froze solid. A well-trained gunner could nurse it through the fight. Short bursts, careful handling, constant cleaning. But most Soviet gunners weren't trained. They were conscripts, farmers, factory workers, teenagers, handed a machine gun and told to hold the line. For them, the DP-28 wasn't a symbol of pride. It was a burden, a heavy, temperamental lifeline between life and oblivion. Its mechanical simplicity was deceptive, because under stress, in heat, mud, or frost, those moving parts would seize. The recoil spring, exposed under a flimsy dust cover, could bend or snap. And if the pan magazine warped, even slightly, the gun became useless. Soviet engineers knew these flaws. So did the soldiers. But in Stalin's army, complaining wasn't an option. You made it work, or you didn't live long enough to complain. In Red Army newsreels, the DP-28 was shown as a hero's weapon, blazing in the hands of victorious soldiers. But the truth on the front lines was far grimmer. Every DP team consisted of 2 men, a gunner and a loader. The loader's job was to carry extra pan magazines, sometimes 6 or more, stacked like dinner plates in a canvas bag. Each one weighed nearly 2 kilograms. Each one could jam. Imagine running through snow with 12 kilos of fragile steel discs on your back, praying none of them bend. That was the life of a Soviet machine gunner. A fight not just against the enemy, but against his own weapon. It's easy to see now why soldiers called it the record player. Because every firefight with the DP-28 was like playing the same tune. A repeating rhythm of jam, curse, fix, fire, jam again. And as the war dragged on, that rhythm became a death sentence for thousands. Next, we uncover what happened when the record player met the German MG-34. How its flaws turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. And why the Soviet Union kept using it long after they knew it was broken. The front lines of the Eastern Front were not made for fragile machines. Snow, mud, ice, and fire, that was the Soviet gunner's world. For the men who carried the DP-28, the real enemy wasn't just the Wehrmacht. It was the gun itself. It was supposed to be a light machine gun. But with its thick steel barrel and oversized magazine, it weighed as much as a modern-day machine gunner's entire loadout. 10 kilograms of metal that bucked, overheated, and refused to cooperate. In battle, the DP-28's barrel was its biggest weakness. After just 2 or 3 magazines, it began to glow red. Keep firing, and the metal warped. Once warped, the gun's accuracy vanished, and the weapon became nothing more than a hot, heavy liability. Worse, Soviet doctrine encouraged sustained fire, cover your comrades, suppress the enemy. So gunners did what they were told, until their barrels failed. Changing barrels wasn't an option. The DP had no quick change system, like the German MG-34 or MG-42. Once overheated, your only choice was to wait and pray you survived the cooldown. Across the battlefield, German gunners wielded precision. The MG-34 and later MG-42, belt-fed, water-smooth, terrifyingly efficient. They could fire over 1,200 rounds per minute, melting through squads with surgical precision. The DP-28? Barely 550. When a Soviet unit ran into an MG nest, they knew their record player was out of its league. The DP spat while the MG roared. It was like bringing a gramophone to a gunfight. But wasn't just the barrel. The magazine, the DP's iconic spinning disc, was a nightmare in the field. Made of thin stamped steel, it bent easily. Drop it once on frozen ground, and the rounds inside would misalign. That meant jams. Endless jams. Each disc had to be loaded by hand, carefully pressing each 7.62 millimeters round into place. 47 bullets per magazine, and no room for error. During retreats, many soldiers left their extra discs behind. They were too heavy to carry, too fragile to be worth the weight. So when the fighting began, a gunner might only have 2, maybe 3, working magazines. That was 2 minutes of life. Maybe less. After that, he was down to a rifle, a sidearm, or his bare hands. German troops learned to listen for it the moment a DP stopped firing. That gap in the rhythm meant one thing: the Soviet gunner was reloading. And that's when they attacked. For every jammed DP, another Soviet squad was cut down. One veteran recalled. The Germans waited for the pause. They knew when our record player skipped. Then there was the problem of reliability. The DP's open bowl design let in dirt, ash, and snow like an open wound. In the mud of spring or the frost of winter, it froze solid. To start firing again, soldiers had to slam the bolt with their boots or beat the receiver with a shovel. It became a ritual. Not cleaning, but beating your weapon to life. The DP-28 turned the simple act of survival into an act of endurance. And yet, it kept the Red Army in the fight. Because for every JAM DP, another 10 were being built somewhere deep in the Soviet heartland. They weren't built for precision. They were built for replacement. In the Soviet Union's brutal arithmetic of war, losing a gun or a gunner didn't matter, as long as the next one was ready to take his place. By 1944, over 800,000 DP-28s had rolled off assembly lines. And that flood of cheap firepower, broken or not, overwhelmed the German army by sheer numbers. The record player wasn't winning by quality. It was winning by exhaustion. By the war's end, the DP-28 was everywhere, from Stalingrad's ruins to the streets of Berlin. But ask any veteran who used one, and the answer was the same. They didn't love it. They survived it. After the victory in 1945, the Soviet Union faced an uncomfortable truth. Their record player had done its job, but only barely. The DP-28 was outdated, fragile, and outclassed. So in the late 1940s, Degtyaryov tried again. He created the DPM, a modernized version with a stronger bipod, a pistol grip, and a better recoil spring. It was sturdier, more balanced, and less likely to jam. But the disc magazine stayed. And with it, the same old problems. The Soviets couldn't escape their own design. By the time the Korean War erupted, the DP was everywhere again. Chinese and North Korean soldiers carried thousands of them, leftovers from World War II. They called it the dinner plate. American troops had another name, the record gun. Reports described it as inaccurate, sluggish, and unreliable. But its biggest danger wasn't to those facing it. It was to those firing it. Its overheating problem still hadn't gone away. Its weight still slowed down infantry. Its top-mounted magazine still blocked the shooter's vision. But the Soviets kept using it anyway. Why? Because in their philosophy, weapons didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to be enough. By 1948, the DP finally had a successor, the RPD, belt-fed, lighter, and far more reliable. It was the machine gun the DP-28 had tried to be. But the old record player refused to disappear completely. It stayed in service across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East for decades, handed down from one war to another. From the sands of Egypt to the jungles of Vietnam, it kept spinning its deadly tune. Today, the DP-28 sits quietly in museums. But for the men who used it, it was never just a weapon. It was a gamble, a 47-round bet that your luck wouldn't run out before the barrel did. It wasn't elegant like the German MG-42. It wasn't iconic like the American Browning. It was crude, temperamental, and exhausting. A weapon built by a desperate nation for desperate times. And yet, it did what it had to. It gave Soviet soldiers a fighting chance, even when everything else had failed. The DP-28 wasn't a masterpiece. It was survival, welded together with fear and steel. That's why they called it the record player. Because when it played, it could save your life. But when it skipped, it could end it.